A Supreme Court showdown over religion and public education at stake, whether Oklahoma can fund the nation's first religious charter school. The outcome could reshape how your tax dollars are being used to fund education in America. Joining us now to discuss is Erika, the chair of America First Policy Institute Center for Education Opportunity. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Erika, you were outside the Supreme Court yesterday as these oral arguments were starting and ending. That could decide whether to allow Oklahoma to fund the first religious charter school. What's so interesting is that you've had this up close and personal view where we're kind of like scanning some of the articles coming in. We have a list for you, some of the headlines that are rolling in. You have the SCOTUS blog, Supreme Court divided over approving first religious charter school. You have Politico saying the Supreme Court appears ready to bless the country's first public religious school. You have USA Today saying the Supreme Court has heated exchange in blockbuster religious charter school case. Kind of be our eyes on the ground. The momentum that you're feeling on the ground outside the Supreme Court and any sense of where this could be headed.
Well, it was absolutely exciting to be there outside of the Supreme Court yesterday with about 150 other people who were in support of St. Isidore being granted a charter to operate in Oklahoma and serve parents and students there. Now, what this case is about is really about freedom of choice for parents. And the Supreme Court has held that when it comes to contracts with a government, and that's what a charter school is, it is considered a public school, but it is a private entity with a contract with the government. And so just like some of these other cases, if the government says, we will contract with you to run a public school, they cannot discriminate against St. Isidore, which has outstanding academic results, simply because of their religious affiliation. I am very much in support, as were the ones who were at the rally with me, of allowing parents to choose this option to align with their values and their religious beliefs.
Well, you know, there has been some divide about this, even in the state of Oklahoma, where this case originated at. This case made it all the way to the Oklahoma Supreme Court. They essentially rejected the contract to open, as you mentioned, the religious charter school. You had the Oklahoma Attorney General, Drummond, basically argued the case. This is what he said leading up to the Supreme Court case.
So we, the state, have entered into a contract with a private entity to form a public entity called St. Isidore Public Charter School. It is effectively funding religious indoctrination. I believe that that was a violation of our Constitution, and I sued. Our Oklahoma Supreme Court ruled 7-2 in my favor.
Now, this is not coming from a quote-unquote woke liberal, but a Republican lawmaker who's calling this, as you just heard, indoctrination and in some ways unconstitutional. Why do you think the opposite, especially when you take into consideration the First Amendment and the Establishment Clause?
Well, sure. I disagree with Attorney General Drummond that this is a public entity. I have opened and run several charter schools myself, been a school board member as well, and I know how this works. These are private, nonprofit organizations with independent boards in contract with the government to run a school that is publicly funded. That is very different than being a governmental entity or even a public-private partnership. And so I just disagree with him on the facts, and reasonable people can be on both sides of this issue. I do believe, based on the Supreme Court precedent, that they are going to side with the private entity that is applying for a contract that is available to all types of entities, and they cannot discriminate against a religiously affiliated entity in this case.
Well, how do you square this with, you know, public schools are open to all people, but religious schools, they can show preference based on faith, at least when it comes to hiring. So how do you square possibly using taxpayer dollars for a religious school that could show certain preferences, which they don't do in public schools, or at least they can't?
Yeah, actually, St. Isidore does apply the non-discrimination clauses in their contract. They have met all the other requirements of a charter school to operate in Oklahoma. So this is also part of the controversy, right? Yeah. Some would say they don't want private schools to participate in these programs because of the government requirements. Maybe there's accountability requirements or being open to everyone and not being able to be selective. But if a religious institution wants to participate and is accepting of those governmental restrictions, then they should be allowed to. I think that's the point. They don't have to. Gotcha. Can certainly choose schools that have more selective criteria for teachers and students, but in this case they want to meet the government criteria, and they want to serve all students, and they should be able to do that.
And real quickly, what do you think of Justice Amy Coney Barrett recusing herself? What impact did this now have?
Well, listening to the oral arguments yesterday, I don't think it's going to change the outcome of the case. It did seem like the majority of justices understood the arguments of the Oklahoma Charter School Board that approved this application and how it relates to the previous cases that they've decided in favor of the institutions that want to serve the public.
All right, Chair of America First Policy Institute Center for Education Opportunity, Erika, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.